Hi, my name is Crispina French, and promoting creative textile reuse is my jam. I'm an OG textile alchemist, worked my way through art school making ragamuffins from thrift store sweaters way back in the 1980s. That college side hustle grew into a full-fledged business, and here I am today to show you how to do it too. Stick around for all the things helping to navigate both the chaotic and dreamy chapters of building your profitable textile upcycling business. We'll talk material sourcing, business savvy, product development, marketing, and self-care. Gloss over the hard parts? Not here. Experience, lessons, and know-how. Deep dive into the struggles, wins, and rewards of running your sustainable textile upcycling business. Think of this as your favorite craft class mixed with environmental business school. Are you ready to be inspired, energized, and supported? This is the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. Are you a textile-centric crafter who loves vintage yardage, unusual fabrics, notions, and sewing tools and tutorials? Maybe you're a sewing teacher in need of cool and inexpensive cloth for students. Whether sewing high-end bespoke couture or experimenting with new textile making processes, swansonsfabrics.com, located in the heart of Turners Falls, Massachusetts, has just what you need. You can shop online or at the very well-organized and jam-packed store. Swanson's Fabrics is a thrift shop of fabric, notions, and textile tools. It's a community repurposing the leftover collections of home sewers, addressing the reality that we have enough fabric and craft supplies for generations, stored right in our very own attics and closets. Swanson's makes it very easy to pass on an excessive fabric stash and find inspirational treasure for sewing projects. Additionally, Catherine Swanson hosts an online group for entrepreneurs interested in using her business model for fabric thrift stores in their communities. Find Swanson Fabrics at swansonfabrics.com and on TikTok and Instagram. Hi out there at Rags to Riches podcast listeners. Today, I'm super excited to introduce you to somebody I've been following around for many years, actually. And I'm so excited to get to meet and chat with Lou Mason. Lou makes the most amazing and quite comical, humorous, awesome rag rugs. And she lives over in Yorkshire, UK, and at the town of York. So Lou, welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for that nice introduction. It's good to meet you.
I'm so excited to actually pick your brain a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about the rugs that you make and just give people a little background about what they look like and what your process is?
So I make rugs in, I suppose it's more an American tradition, the looped pile rather than a shaggy pile. I come from Yorkshire, and in Yorkshire, the traditional rugs have a shaggier pile. It's a very different process, but they're still rag rugs. So I make the pile that you're used to in America, where it's loops. And
so it's like a hooking process?
Yeah, like a hooky, yeah. We have made them in this country historically, but not as much as the clippy mats, what they're called. The rugs. The typical Yorkshire rugs are called, rag rugs, clippy mats, or proddies or proggies, depending on where you come from. I mean, I'm going into a history lesson now. Is this okay?
That's fine. Yeah, teach me what you got.
It's sort of the rugs in the UK, particularly in the north of England, were made from necessity. They weren't made because it's a nice thing to do, but they were made for cold cottages in the north of England. Cold cottages that had stone-flagged floors, no carpets, no central heating, just a sort of a coal fire. And a lot of the people that made them worked in the Yorkshire woolen mills and would be given bags of offcuts, which they would then cut into pieces and poke through hessian to make a shaggy pile. These rugs are incredibly warm and quite long lasting and quite beautiful, but colours available were quite dark. There are a lot of browns and navy blues and blacks, and maybe a splash of a red diamond in the middle. That's a classic Yorkshire rug, and not only Yorkshire, but like northeast, more Newcastle area. And so they still.
And what was the size typically? Were they kind of like big or small? Like what size?
Hearth rug size.
Hearth rugs.
Okay. Size. And they were. The story goes that they would start off on the top of the bed to keep you warm, and then they would go as a bedside rug, and then when they were a bit warm, they would go downstairs as a hearth rug, and then when they were kind of even more knackered, they would go in the kitchen and end up, in the dog basket. So they'd go right round. So they were just used till they fell apart. That's the kind of tradition of rug making in the north of England. And I love that. And I think that's really inspiring. And I've made quite a lot of, they're called clippy mats, But I much prefer making the hooky because it's easier and you can really get going with the design, and it uses less rag actually, and there's less cutting up. And so I favour that as a process, and I make, they're quite chunky. I don't really go for very, very fine work, but that's just my style. And I do make quite big rugs as well as small rugs. I think the whole idea of a hearth rug is quite interesting because a lot of modern houses don't have fireplaces now. They don't have mantelpieces now. The heating systems are such that there isn't like a warm centre to the house where you sit around, or the warm centre of the house where you sit around now tends to be the telly. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I like the idea of making a rug, you can't call it a hearth rug now for houses that haven't got hearths, but it's like a warm centre of the house. So I'm sort of interested in that whole idea.
In creating that, right? Like creating that.
People sit around and feel at home around. I mean, I'm interested in the whole idea of home as well, actually, and what home means to different people and represents to different people. And so I think there's potential for rugs to be the warm heart of a house.
That's awesome. I love that.
Used to be. But so I make all sorts of rugs with words in, or with patterns in, or with figures in, or with imagery from nature, or all sorts of rugs. That's the kind of.
And I love the sense of color that you haven't even mentioned. Like you have this wackadoodle sense of color that I just can't get enough of.
See, I don't really think it is wackadoodle at all. I mean, I suppose what I'm saying is, we are so lucky because in the old days, as I mentioned to you before, our forebearers that made rag rugs had a very, very limited palette to work in. Clothes were scarce. You couldn't go to the charity shop or the thrift store and sort of buy a bag of clothes because people didn't have many clothes, and the clothes that they had were probably made locally, and so much has changed, and fast fashion and techniques of dyeing cloth, and the availability, which, and a lot of it is bad. It's bad because dyeing cloth uses far too much water and chemicals, and fast fashion, it encourages taking advantage of cheap labor, and it encourages bad practices in many ways. But what we have is this treasure chest of color, which our forebears didn't have. So I'm always trying to sort of think of, the people who made rugs before us. That, for example, the man who had the vegetable shop at the bottom of the road, when he found out I made rag rugs, he described how his mum used to make them out of their old clothes. But occasionally in the village, someone from the local hunt would give her a hunting pink. Do you know what a hunting pink is? It's a woolen, bright red jacket that hunting people wore. And if you were given one of those, it's, really good quality wool, but it's red. And how exciting it was for her to have something red. So anyway,
Hence the red diamonds in the middle of the rug. Is that where they came from?
So I often think about that. So I love that. I love that use of color. Also, quite often when I go, rag hunting, there's a sort of a level at which you're thinking there's a sort of like an archaeological level of rags, which are probably from the last 5 years. And then a bit below that is maybe from 10 years, 15. And about 5 years ago, fluorescent colors were really popular amongst kids. So, I get all this because they've either grown out of them or fluorescent's gone. But I love it because it's like, oh yeah. And so I really enjoy putting a bit of fluorescent in, especially if it suits the subject matter. I made some punk crowns and I put lots of, fluorescent in. But also one of the people I share a studio with, he makes collages and he's pretty successful. Of all of us, he's really successful. And his collages are ripped up bits of paper. Mine are sort of cut up pieces of cloth. So we have a lot of common ground. And he's very good at walking over to me and saying, just put a bit of orange there, or look at these two colours. Look how vibrant they are together. So we sort of rub off on each other, and that's really helped me. So that's
awesome to have that kind of community and that kind of kind of input, right, from somebody else who really understands the process, right, in a different media, but like similar, like visual. That's so cool. The importance
of differentiating background to foreground.
That's really cool.
Linking them up in a way.
Yeah. How did you get interested in making rugs to start with? Like, what brought you to carpets and rugs?
Well, it was really. I love pattern making, and I've always painted patterns. And it was, I just haven't got the patience. I sew and I knit, but I'm not very good. But rug making appealed to me because I saw these clippy mats in Yorkshire, and I thought I'm going to have a go at that. So it was making the tufted ones with all the ends sticking up. It was seeing them around, and the fact that they're quite rough and ready, and they're easy to do, and they're not finicky, and they're not sort of incredibly neat. And so all those things appealed to me. And also I had I had a baby and then I had another baby. And so you can pick it up and put it down and it's not going to unravel and you don't have to count where you are on the row. And so that appealed to me too. And we did live in quite a cold house and we didn't have carpets and so all those things appealed to me. But and then when I really got going with them, of course, I did find out that I knew that my mother's uncle made rag rugs. I mean, I've told you that. Have I told you that?
No.
My mother's American,
cool.
From the East Coast, and her family, her uncle, which is my great uncle, whose name was Theodore Sizer, made rag rugs.
Oh, and in the States or in the UK?
No.
In the States.
He Connecticut. And, so I always knew that. And in fact, when I was about 19 or 18, I did a bit of a roots trip to America and I went to see, he'd already died, but his wife went to visit her and I saw his rugs and I found out about his rugs and I always kind of remembered them. And his daughter has really archived his work magnificently and has sent me everything, all the images of his rugs. And they've always been in my head when I really kind of put two and two together. And then I sort of started making the style that he makes or made. He never made the rugs to sell. He made them to give to families and to give to people. So they're very personal rugs. And they're probably much finer than mine, actually. And he was an artist, and his calligraphy is fantastic, and so the words are, they're absolutely astounding rugs, and so I've sort of spent a lot of time looking at his work, and I don't come anywhere near his level of expertise. but I do something different.
Yeah, you've taken it and made it your own process and
But
kind of created
and I know more about the American tradition, I suppose, because my mother's sister has sent me some books, and I know about the rugs that were made in Labrador and parts of Canada, and I know more about the American rugs in a way because they've been better documented than our rugs, because a lot of the American rugs were made to be handed down like patchwork, whereas our rugs were made to be walked on and didn't.
Well, that's one thing I've heard about, people who quilts, like traditional quilts in the United States. There's like this, there's beautiful quilts, and the ones that are well preserved were the ones that were from very wealthy households, because the people who made them to use them, and they got worn out. And like you said, they wound up maybe in the dog basket, right? Like they kind of did the truly circular process of being in use. So that's really cool. And I wonder, like, I know that traditionally rugs are made from, used clothing and like bits and ends and like the mill waste that you mentioned at the beginning of, just like that's where the people got their fabric from. And I wonder if there was a point where you became interested in, upcycling fabric. Was it because of the rugs, or were you interested in the rugs because you were interested in upcycling discarded clothing? Like,
I've always been an addict of what we still call jumble sales. I mean, since I was 14, every village hall or church hall or school hall had jumble sales to raise money for charity. And I've always enjoyed rummaging and finding things. And, most of my clothes are from that, and they always have been. And I used to buy clothes and dye them or chop them or add bits to them or take bits away from them, because they were so cheap and you could try things out, or you could try something out that wouldn't be something you would normally wear. So I've always clothed myself in that way and fill the house with, all my pots and everything. So jumble sales is where I go. So the idea of going to jumble sales to buy the materials from which to make something really appealed to me, rather than going to a knitting shop and spending a lot of money on yarn. And then, because half the time, I'd come home, with the pram loaded with rags to cut up and end up maybe wearing half of them and then cut them up. Or, so like it's an interchangeable thing, what I wear and what I cut up.
Yeah, I know. I remember, this is a funny story. I was, my family, when my kids were younger, we went to Ireland, and oddly enough, my mom's American as well, and my dad was from Ireland. So we traveled back and forth a bunch, and we were at this kind of fancy evening out. It was my husband and I, and he put his arm around me at one point. I was kind of chilly, and he's like, "Oh, there's a giant hole in the back of your dress." And I'm like, "What?" Like, I just bought a new dress. And he said, "Well, I saw Lucy with the scissors." And, how could you get upset with this little 3-year-old kid who just saw me cutting stuff up all the time? And thankfully, I had like a little shawl I could wear over the hole in my dress. But like, there are like unforeseen dangers to having that fluidity, right? Is it material? Is it a garment I'm wearing? Is it going to be a robe? What is it? Kids get confused. But we're going to take a little break right now. We are talking with Lou Mason from Lou Mason Rag Rugs. And we're going to come right back. This episode of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast is brought to you by The Unruffled. The Unruffled is a vibrant and feminine collection of slow-made garments and accessories, handmade with love by Sandra Primo. Sandra is based in Austin, Texas, and every item she makes is thoughtfully constructed from finely sourced, reused textiles, favoring silks and lace and crochet. Bespoke, one of one, encouraging an infinite circle of recovery. Step into the world of the Unruffled at www.theunruffled.com. And visit the show notes page for this episode at ragstoriches.eco for links and more information. All right, we're back with Lou Mason, based over in Yorkshire, the UK, where she has kind of followed and chronicled for us the tradition of rag rugs in her culture. It sounds like it's a pretty localized tradition too, like just in your little neck of the woods. Is that true?
I don't know. I don't really know. I don't really know whether they made rag rugs in the south of England, to be honest, but it's a North England thing.
Yeah. And I'm sure, it's like you were saying to start with, like a lot of these traditions that we now look back on and collect because they're such beautiful kind of folk art pieces that can be found were started for necessity. They were just, the floor was cold and people wanted not to be cold. So they made rag rugs. And could you talk a little bit more about, we've talked a little bit about your process and about your, when I see your work, I think of it as like this sort of beautiful marriage of primitive and very fine. And I would love to just talk a little bit about, where you come, how you find the imagery, what your inspiration is, what your kind of, yeah.
Well, I suppose because I've always enjoyed painting patterns, repeat patterns, pretending I was a textile designer, really, surface patterns. So I do love that sort of repeat of symbols and images that don't really necessarily mean anything, but are fun to play with. So my love of patterns is one place. A bit like my Uncle Tubby, if I'm making a rug for someone, I like to incorporate, something that's meaningful to them. But I've done a lot of work with cut paper over the years as well, a lot of installation work. And my cut paper has definitely informed my rug making. So, for example, I made about 30 life-size figures in cut paper of sort of costumed, slightly historical figures, and I've replicated them in rag rugs. At least 4 or 5 of them I've done as rag rugs. So that's so patterns, the cut paper figures, cut paper flowers. I've done lots of cut paper flowers as hangings. That's really informed me. So there's also like a tradition, which is, I'm sure, the same in America. I know it is, of embroidery work that was maybe done 100 or long, it's always been done by women's work of embroidering very neatly, something like "In God We Trust," some words which are righteous and religious, maybe. And I like that sort of slightly subverting that by putting things in, but by using words and making a sort of a statement, but not something necessarily biblical or anything like riot or all things are possible. Although actually, all things are possible comes from a gospel song. So in fact, it is biblical. Home together. I'm making one at the moment that actually says everything to everybody, because that's from a quote, but it's more Marxist than Bible, which is now is the time to give everything to everybody. And I'm just going to do everything to everybody. I'm not doing now is the time, because it's powerful. Welcome is a very powerful word. It's traditional as well.
Yeah. It's so cool. That's what I love how you put like welcome, welcome back.
Now, welcome's supposed to also look like a 50s diner or a jukebox. Sometimes.
Or like, to me, the one that I'm thinking of, the rug I am thinking of in my head, it reminds me of like a game board.
Yeah, that's welcome. Yeah, I think of it as like a jukebox or like a.
But like the imagery and the color and the texture is like, there's just this combination that happens in your work that's just so. Like there's, there's history and there's nostalgia, but there's like this primitive meshing with, like maybe it's righteousness. Maybe that's the word I'm seeking. Like it's just beautiful.
Or not necessarily righteousness, but something that actually means something. That's not just, it's not just throw away. It's something I've thought about. That's really it.
Yeah.
That's, not everything I make is like that. Not everything I make. But also there's a bit of like my Uncle Tubby, and so he was quite, he made himself a rug with a little portrait of his face with his twirly moustache saying, "And so to bed." And he made one for his wife's side of the bed saying, "Mum's the boss." And, so he was but they're beautifully made, fantastic calligraphy.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'd put Latin words in because he was kind of really good at all that kind of thing. So, and he did fantastic welcome rugs. He did a rug that said "Waste not, want not" with all his bits left over. And so he used words, in a really kind of very different to the English tradition. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not all about words, and it's not all about having to mean something. Sometimes it's just about enjoying. Like I've just made one, which is like a real explosion of color from a star, and it's supposed to be that sort of warm center of a house.
I love that. I love that. Just not the possibility of a rug creating that. It's just so beautiful. And then also for me, like the textile, the recycled aspect of it is like the warm center of the house is made from all these different people's stuff, right? Like it's just, I don't know, there's just like this thread that just kind of continues through the whole process and the story and the history that really makes it that warm center.
I don't quite know how I'm going to do it, but I often think, because I look at the labels in fact, I've made a rug of a dress, which is like a dress on a hanger. And I've left all the ends sticking up. So you can really see that the dress is made out of clothes. You can really see that. There's even a label on one of the bits of cloth sticking out, which I'm going to exhibit it like that. But obviously it's going to look much better once I cut all the bits off. But once you cut all the bits off, you can't then do that, but I'm doing it as a sort of a way of...
It's like the secret is gone. It's like you're letting people into the secret, right?
But also I'm acknowledging the fact, I don't know, there's something about many hands have gone through the making of the clothes that have gone into the rugs. So it's kind of making it a little bit more visible. And really what I should do is I should leave all the labels on that say made in Bangladesh or made in India or made in Pakistan or made in China, or, that's really what I should do.
Yeah.
But I thought of that too late, and it was, but then...
I wonder if you could put them on the back. Maybe pull the ends through to the back and then so that they are still there, but the rug is,
It's really beautiful. I mean, I do use blankets as well, and I always cut the labels off blankets because blanket labels are really something else,
Yeah, they are.
But I often wonder about, for example, I live quite near a town called Bradford, which has a really big Asian community, and it has fantastic sari shops, and and I know that recycled saris is quite a thing. People make shopping bags out of them, and but I quite like the idea of making something using cloth that is not from my culture. I don't know. I don't quite know but it's like thinking more of the cloth as well as my own stuff, thinking about where does the cloth come from? What are the, I mean, I was thinking about the word home, and I've done a rug which says home, but I was thinking about what home means. I mean, the rug I made that says home is in a sort of a boat shape, and it's got waves all around it. We have a lot of going on with refugees coming to this country in small boats. And I was just thinking home, their home is that boat for that very dangerous person. I was thinking, that whole thing of, is home, is it what is it that makes somewhere home? Is it because it's got colours or smells that make you feel at home? Or is it because the people so there's kind of something that I'd like to explore with other people, sort of group thing about what home means. And anyway, it's just ideas,
Yeah, it's really cool. I remember one of the things that I love, I mean, I mentioned a little bit about how, the pieces, I make a blanket that has 404, I can't remember. It's 23 by 23 squares. So there's a lot of squares. Yeah. And I sometimes when I'm making it, I think, if every single one of those squares was from a different sweater,
Yeah.
and there would be that many people represented in this blanket. And then you think about like, okay, that was the person who wore the sweater. Then you think about the person who made the sweater, or the person who gave the person the sweater. Yeah. You know, there's so many tentacles of connection, right?
That's the extraordinary thing about textiles, and they're worn close to the skin. But so to get back to why I do the designs I do, I mean, I've got various ongoing projects, and one is the word welcome, which I want to do in other languages, but I haven't done it yet. Another is portraits of women who were sort of iconic to me. So I've done a very wonderful Brazilian footballer called Marta Vieira da Silva, who's kind of broken boundaries. I've done a portrait of a musician called Sister Rosetta Tharpe. I've done a portrait of a Ukrainian artist whose name has just escaped me, but whose a lot of her work nearly got destroyed in the beginning of the war, but was saved. And apologies that I just can't think of what her name is, but
we'll put it in the show notes when you think of it, and
I could Google it right now actually in a minute. But I've done a portrait of a sort of like a musical juggler whose name was Kathy Gualtieri. You know, I'm sort of always looking at people who I want to represent, but and I've done angel, I've done, you know, so the big ones, which are the figures, which are sort of like 1.5 meters high, they take a long time. It's like a month. So there's only so many. There's only so many that I can do. So small. So I sort of like to do a combination really, and then I get orders. And orders are difficult. Orders are really difficult when someone wants something. So, for example, I made a couple of crowns to celebrate the Jubilee recently, but they're kind of really offbeat crowns. They're not sort of like regal. They're not like conventional.
Are they crowns like on a rug, or are they crowns to put on your head?
No, on a rug. And somebody ordered one that wanted one, and I didn't get the colours right for what she had in mind. And then you realise it's really different with rag rugs, because you don't quite. So I'm a bit wary of doing orders, because somebody's
and I think
an idea in their head, and you don't really quite get it, or they don't quite get you. That's the only time. To be fair, that's the only time that's happened. But
but it is disheartening when you spend, and also I think that customers sometimes need to be interviewed and culled. Like if somebody doesn't want to allow you the creative freedom to do the colors that speak to you in that moment, then they probably, haven't found the right maker. They need to get a different
her name, Maria Primachenko. Maria Primachenko. I mean, she's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic paintings. Kind of quite folk arty. Yeah.
Yes, I've actually I read about her.
A few rugs that have been inspired by her.
That's awesome. And then the other thing that I think is just the hysterically funny ones, the ones where it's like a garment and you hold it up in front of your body like you're wearing it. It's just like, I don't know. I think, was there one that was like a T-shirt?
The two jumper. Well, I made 3 jumper rugs. I mean, I've sold them all, but that was because I went to an exhibition in Edinburgh of knitwear, and it was just a wonderful exhibition. And they had a wall of Fair Isle tank tops and jumpers, and I love all that. I mean, I'm actually wearing a tank top, but I love all that kind of thing. And then I thought, I'm going to make, and and then one of my studio pals said, right, just hold it up and snap, 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 And
it was great.
Well, the dress is called Rag Trade, and that's the one that I was explaining. I've left all the bits on. Yeah. And it's also about power dressing, and it's it's
very cool. It's really, really cool. So I think that what I'm hearing and what I'm learning is that, yes, you make rugs, but really what you make is art, and there's like this process and thought and sort of theory, maybe even maybe it's a philosophical expression of your desire to communicate through this very useful, utilitarian, center of the home warmth thing, right? This medium that's just that, and it all sort of works together. And I think that that's a really cool thing. Like to be an artist and to work on your own and to know like, yeah, a rug, this size rug takes me a month. And, I don't know, one thing we haven't talked about, which maybe we should, is like, have you ever thought about having somebody help you? Or is that something that you're just like?
When I was making them in the 80s, this girl, in my town asked me if she could come and work with me. And so, yeah, she sort of came and cut up bits for me. And I don't know. I mean, I at the time I was sort of thinking, yeah, that's great. But she didn't last very long. I don't know why, it didn't sort of work out. But no, I don't really want to do that because I don't really want to ever be a production line. And it's not really a business, to be perfectly honest with you. It doesn't really make a lot of business sense. It really doesn't.
Yeah. So you're an artist that sells your work, and that's beautiful. And, one of the things that I talk a lot about with the people who I coach, the entrepreneurs, like there's a fine balance between making something that feeds your soul, that's artful, that's like meaningful and really heartfelt, versus producing and having like, oh, I need to make 25 of this thing. Well, that heartfelt, artful communication is sort of removed when you get to that point of deciding, and that's kind of the path that I walked, where when my production company started, I was kind of in the middle of that. Like, is this art or is this a production? And, I guess that's where maybe craft, I don't know. I always hear is it art
I'm
or
very
craft?
wary of the sort of labeling of it all, what's
Yeah. It's more just like the feeling for me, the feeling of, being like, for me, I was like, I hired a ton of people. I was like, okay, we're going to make this like a production and I'm going to give people jobs. And it was, it removed the connection I had to the art of making. And I found that in other ways where it was separated from the product I was making. And, it was product at that point. And I think that was the difference for me, was like just, feeling capable and willing to let go of that. And, it's just like, it's personal for everybody, right? Like,
got to do what you've got to do, haven't you?
Yeah. So if you could see like 6 months or maybe more, like say 2.5, 3 years from now, and everything was just like going exactly how you would dream it up, is there something that would be different about what you're doing? Or what do you think, like, how would you like to see your work unfold for the world?
I mean, in a way, I think, if I showed my work in galleries more, that would be great, and broke down some of those the prejudices against textile art in galleries. And if I was lucky enough to win a competition, that would be great. If I got a residency somewhere, that would be fantastic. I mean, I used to do lots of workshops, but I don't at the moment, but I wouldn't mind doing some workshops. Again, it depends on who with. I'm quite interested in working with people to, I don't know. I really don't know, but I'd like to think that I had something going with maybe a group of maybe some refugees, that kind of thing. I'd quite like to do that. I'd love to be, someone say, we're awarding you a residency of a month in the Outer Hebrides to stay in this cottage and make rugs. I mean, that would be fantastic. Or, I was lucky enough to have a rug in the Royal Academy Summer Show in London, which was sort of put me in touch with a really different kind of community, because it's mainly paintings. And that was really, that was a real honor. So if anything else like that came along, that would be really nice. It's nice when I can sort of like tell my story without feeling I have to fit into certain boxes. 2 or 3 years from now, I'd like to think that I'm just still doing it.
Awesome. Yeah, I hope so, because I find your work just to be super captivating and really inspiring on so many levels. So thank you so much for spending your time with us and sharing about your story, and the history of your process is just so super helpful to have. And thank you. It was really, really lovely. Hey, so I'm over here and I'm serving you a giant air hug because you just finished another episode of the Rags to Riches Textile Upcycling Podcast. Thank you for being with me. Our music is provided by The Lucky Five. Learn more about them at thelucky5.com. Our show is produced and edited by Vandal Hyacinth. If you want to dive in deep, head over to ragstoriches.eco.